First thing is open the hood, take a look at the car, get an idea. This car is going to take a twin nozzle, two number 10 nozzles because of the needing of fuel added for delivery. These nozzles will be located top and bottom of the charge pipe after the mass airflow meter, and then these will deliver enough methanol to make up for power on the top end. First step in getting the kit installed, since this kit's being an underhood kit, we're going to use the factory washer bottle as the methanol bottle, and this video will show how to make those changes and install it. First thing we need to do is take the driver's side tire off to gain access to the inner fender. So I'll be back in a second. So once the car is up in the air, you notice this is a ZL1, we're going to then take the inner fender skirt down to be able to gain access to the factory washer tank and motor and stuff, so we can mount the bracket. On this Camaro we ended up having 12 T20s Torx, and we got like 5 little snap clips. So here's the untouched factory washer bottle that we're going to use as a meth tank. Continue soon. Next step here is we're going to drain this tank, put the float switch in it, put the plug into it, and then hang the pump here on the right next to the tank. This is the bolt that holds the horn that we will use for hanging the pump, and it's right in front of the washer bottle. So following the installation, to install the fitting in the bottom of the tank and the float switch, it's going to require a unibit that the maximum size on it is 7/8, and there's a picture inside the manual depicting how that looks installed along with the tank plug. So what I do is usually I go right now, I'll install the fitting on the back of the tank to drain the washer fluid that's in it, and I'll post up pretty soon. Here it shows you the location of the outlet fitting and the on the bottom of the tank towards the back, and the float switch fitting, which will go here on the side. Both of these holes were 7/8. I'll install those fittings now, and a little WD-40 on the rubber grommets, and push them in, and you're done. Here it is. Tank plug's in its place, low level it's in its place, tank fitting is in its place. Next move is mounting the pump, so we'll put fittings on it, and then we'll hang it on that bolt. Here is the pump, and here are a set of pump fittings on that same page. We're going to install them. These are installed finger tight only, so you don't crack the head of the pump. Here is a picture of the pump with the bracket mounted on it so we can hang it. Notice that I put the white wire with the blue O-ring on the bottom of the bracket, that way it can get ground. And at this point the fittings are installed. One of them faces towards the tank, and that's the inlet fitting, which is the larger one. The smaller one for pressure is basically going to point up. There's going to be a 26-inch hose attached to the pressure side, and that'll go to the inline filter. I'll go ahead and I'll install that now. That way when I hang the pump I have more access later on. But here goes. Along with the kit comes a 12-foot pump cable that'll go between the pump and the controller inside the cab. That'll be, I usually go ahead, since I'm working on the pump right now, get that installed, along with plugging in the low level into the tank. Here's the harness that comes for the low level. There's going to be a little O-ring with it, and that'll have to go to chassis ground as well, because that's needed for the tank float to give indication inside the car. I'm going to go hook up the ground to the pump ground. Figure it's a good place right there, get all my grounds together, and then I'm going to run the pump cable up and out to the inner fender, and that way I can complete the bottom of this install here. You'll notice here I have the hose already for the pressure side mounted, and that'll run up into the engine compartment now as well. Okay, float switch is plugged in, grounded at the pump, pump's mounted, pressure hose is on, plug is on, couple of zip ties to secure the wires right above here, and you can see feed hose is also mounted from the pump to the tank, nice and swoop. Fittings are tight, this thing is ready. On this car, we're going to put in a special little mini washer tank so the guy can keep his washers, and I'm going to go through that install now. Here is the installation of the small mini optional washer tank so the guy can keep washer functions. All we do is slip the hose over the nipple, and here was where the motor was originally. So now we just put washer tubing over the hose, and we'll run it to the top. We'll then mount a little mini tank. At this point, this really concludes my installation here inside the fender. I'm going to go ahead and put the wheel well back on, and at the same time put the clips and plugs so I can start working under the hood and get under the dash. So this is the mini tank I'm going to use. To put a hose onto it, I simply drill a hole into the bottom of it, 3/8 diameter. I'll use a unibit, real simple tool, and an 1/8 inch NPT tap. Let me do that real quick and I'll thread the fitting onto it. Picture of the tank with the tap into it. Loctite 567 on the threads, and fitting is on. Now I'll put it to the Rotofab cold air intake with a couple simple little 4x20s, and let me get that mounted and put then the Rotofab back on. Here's the mini tank bolted to the air filter box. Pretty simple. Here's a shot of the mini back on the Rotofab. On the Camaro, there is a bolt that holds down the radiator, which is this one. I'm going to go ahead and mount the filter here using that bolt with the little inline clamp, and I'll take a picture of that now mounted. It is important to note that the filter has an arrow indicating liquid flow direction. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure that's in the right direction before installing it. Picture of filter installed, and that's already done. Next move here is I'm going to go ahead and do the wiring on the relay for the fuse box, get that start to get run, then I'll do the nozzles and start wrapping up under the hood. To install a relay, we first have to find a suitable place to mount it, connections to the battery lug, and then we're going to get a trigger to activate it. And this would apply pretty much to any car or any kit that we make. So here's the fuse box up here. You pop it open, and you'll notice that up here on the front is the battery lug, and then we'll get the trigger from inside the fuse box. On this car, I'm just going to mount the relay right by the core support using a little 5/16 self-tapping screw, and I'll follow up with that now. The only other thing is when you mount our relays, there's a black wire. Just use the same 5/16 screw for grounding it. Here is the relay mounted. Notice the ground screw. I put the fuse holder next to it right here. So in case anytime you ever need access for the alcohol kit for power, this can simply be unplugged. And underneath it is a nice 20 amp fuse. We plug that back in again. I'll tighten this screw up now. I'll get my power for my red wire off the lug right here, and I'll run it to the tap inside. Per the instructions, the trigger I use is a little 5 amp fuse that's right here, and that little 5 amp fuse basically will then trigger this gray wire that will attach to that fuse holder right now, and I'll take another picture soon. Here's the wire installed on the fuse, run, and out by the entrance to the top of the cover. I usually may have to, on some of these cars, sometimes trim a little bit the tab that's right here, so that way it can close down over the top of this and still keep things secure. Put a little zip tie and a little bit of loom to clean it up. Next up is we're going to put the 1/4 inch loom over the red wire and then run it over towards where the pump is. So at this point, got the relay mounted. I'm going to secure the wire. Filter's mounted. The little mini tank is mounted. I have the red wire from the relay here. I just put it in with the loom that's supplied with the kit. I'll cover it, tuck it real nicely in there, and then this cable will then run through the firewall into the cab. I'm going to go ahead now and do the wiring for the MAF converter that has to be installed on these wires right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically go back into here with a razor blade, open it up, and then splice into the pink, yellow, and black wires, solder them up, tape them up, and then we'll run that signal wire along with this other conduit that I have here back into the car. So pretty straightforward. As soon as I do the MAF converter, next move on that will be getting the nozzles mounted into the pipe, put the air filter back on, and I'll be keep recording as I can. Here's the tool I use for peeling back the wires, and here's the outcome. So there's the plug for the mass air, and then here are the 3 wires right here that we're just going to splice into for the converter. I'll go ahead and get the little converter, solder the wires onto it, and start filming again. Mass airflow converter soldered in place. Wire colors are the same: yellow, pink, pink, black, black. I took the liberty of going ahead and while it was on the bench, just soldering the green wire on it, the extension, so we can run that into the cab. Now I'll simply tape these up with 3M tape. That way it doesn't come apart. Put it back into the loom, retape it, seal it. And the only last thing that's important here is that these little boxes have a rubber grommet, and even though they're sealed, I like installing them where the rubber grommet faces down, because that way it makes sure that liquids or anything that's splashed in here can't go into the grommet or into the box itself. Same thing with the installation of the relay assembly. The relays are always installed with the wires facing down. All electrical always points down, so if any water were to hit it, it's going to drain down and not collect inside the unit. So here's a video how to install a nozzle into a carbon fiber. I marked the first nozzle on the top where that little black spot is. So I'm going to drill a hole here for 3/8 of a diameter, and then I'm going to drill a hole on the bottom side opposite of it for the other nozzle. Same process. I'm going to tap them slightly with the 1/8 inch NPT tap that we have here, and install the nozzles on a little blue Loctite on the threads, and away we go. I'll be filming pretty soon again. Holes drilled, tapped. So these nozzles, I have to go ahead and take the washers off because the plastic is real thick, and then that way we can get threads on the outside. Let me go ahead and install them and show the exposed threads. Nozzles threaded in, and we have like 4 or 5 threads exposed. That's all we need to be able to get a good bite on the elbows that go on the outside. So I'm going to put a little blue Loctite on them now, on both the threads, and then get the elbows on. Okay, so follow up. Here are the elbows installed. I like keeping the arrows showing flow direction. Here are the check valves that keep, pressure up on the system. And here you can see the blue is, I use Loctite blue on the threads to make sure they don't come apart. I'll go ahead and pre-install this, and we'll get it then set back into the car. So here we go. Mini tank's already hooked up. We got the hose going from it to the nipple on the factory motor. That basically does that. Your tank plugs on, low levels on, grommets on, hoses are done, wiring is loomed up. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and put the inner wheel well back on. I'm done with the installation at up to here, and last thing I have to do under the hood is run the cables into the car. I'll be back. So at this point, all the underhood stuff has been done on the car. Nozzles are on, hoses are routed, relay is done, tank is modified. Here is the little mini tank we can use for windshield washer, the alcohol tank, air filter, Wiring for the mass air back here, I decided to run it this way and around. That way it keeps this area by the air filter box open. At this point I have my loom that's got all my wires over here. I got to get a hole through the firewall to get the cables into the car. Inside the fender liner is all back up now, and we're ready to put the tire on and get this thing back and going again. I'll get a little further instructional now how to get the wires through the firewall, and we'll start wiring inside the car. Last thing here is under the hood. Purposely I leave this fitting that goes on the alcohol lines loose. I'll unscrew it now, because the first time we put alcohol into the tank, we gotta go ahead and burp it. In other words, get all the air out of the system. So I'll leave this line loose like that for now, and then that'll remind me later that I gotta go ahead and burp it, and not only that, hook it up. It's as a good tip, AN lines or flare lines, it's always good that if you're not going to go ahead and put a wrench and tighten them, leave them loose like this or disconnected. That way you don't forget later on that they weren't tightened. So all my fittings is just good to go ahead and touch them, make sure that none of the hoses are loose, and that way later I don't have any leaks or surprises I got to deal with. Okay, one more thing here. You'll also notice that the routing of the hose is above in an area where we're not going to get directed heat on it. I don't have a hose laying on top of a radiator hose or on top of the engine, because alcohol has a low boiling temperature of 160 degrees. That concludes this part. I'll be in touch again when we get the wires through the firewall. So in the Camaro, it's always good looking for an access port for getting into the cab, and I'm going to turn this around so you can see it. There is a hole in the firewall. Let me light it up better. Sorry for the video quality, but there is a rubber grommet there. See where the screwdriver goes through? And that'll get you the wires into the cab without having to drill a hole into the car. And that's what we're going to use for getting our wires into the cab. So here are, fed the wires through the firewall, through the factory grommet that was there, and used the loom to further insulate the wires. Inside the car, just pull off the side kick panel and remove the kick panel here, the driver's door sill and kick panel, and that'll allow you to get to the wires. Now these wires are for the pump, signal, power, and low level. We don't have to touch any of the wires under the dash of this car. The controller will go mounted inside the center console of the Camaro, and then that'll allow it to be used for the test function. And then to run those wires, we simply pull out the side kick panel. What I love about these cars, all this stuff comes apart, just pops off, get it out of the car, so we can run wires and later on install the stuff. I'll continue on with the mounting of the LEDs and controller. So this is my turn on LED and low level LED. They require a 1/4 inch hole to be drilled, and then the wires simply get fed back and attached then to the controller and the wiring that came from under the hood. Let me continue on now for mounting the gain box in the center console and running those wires under the dash. Controller mounting, just drilled the hole, ran it, and it plugs right in to controller. So wiring is pretty simple. All we do is connect the orange and brown from the LED to the orange and brown on the controller, the red from the low level LED to the red on the controller, tan wire from the tank goes to tan wire on the LED. So you keep the colors the same. Green wire from the MAF to the green wire on this, and then the 12 gauge red wire from under the hood to the controller, and ground right to the dash. Next is strip the pump cable and put the terminals on it. Notice that these are crimped always from the bottom side so that the top doesn't split open. So you slide the heat shrink over the back, put the 3 terminals on, and wire them to the controller with the heat shrink. So here it is. pump cable attached, Cat 5 attached that goes to the controller, 6-pin. The wires are attached, and the main power goes to ground and here. Now let's test the kit, make sure it works, and away we go. So, key on. This is what's going to happen. First time, no liquid in tank. Turn it on here, and then there'll be a delay and you'll see it turns on. If I push the test button, it will turn on red, indicating it's less than 50 pounds of pressure. Red light's on, letting know no liquids in the tank. And then we'll just mount this in here, covering. Easy access in case we ever have to get to controls and adjust knobs inside.